Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Patterson. I'm the CEO and founder of Connected Realm Entertainment, and welcome to our session today, Show Don't Tell, the power of video storytelling in driving nonprofit fundraising, outreach, and connections. Just a note to please keep uh, your microphone on mute, and if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat below. Whether you're fundraising, you're raising awareness, or you're building a foundation through brand support, the importance of great storytelling is paramount. Video can be extremely effective in tapping into audience emotions while conveying valuable information about your organization. Now, as I mentioned, I'm Mark Patterson. I'm the founder and CEO of Connected Realm Entertainment, and we're a media publishing company that's founded with Emmy-winning producers and production teams. We work with socially conscious brands, with communities and influencers on branded content, always with a social message and always with the intention of doing good. I'm also joined today by John Cates as well as Evan Schwartz, and I'll let these fine gentlemen introduce themselves. John, why don't you start?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, my name is John Cates. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and I run a creative agency called Cates Collaborative. We are a full-service creative agency and a video production company. Not as much live video production lately as we have in the past, but we are pivoting to a lot of animation-based products. But generally, we are a company that starts a conversation with the creative development process, and a lot of what we do is executed through video. I come from a background in humor. I was a producer at the Second City, which is a comedy theater here in Chicago. I work with a lot of the same folks that I work with there in the corporate division. So our niche is really humor-based. So we work with clients that maybe work with a younger demographic, certainly don't take themselves too seriously, or see the value in humor as a good way to deliver messaging. Evan?
Awesome. Thank you for that. My name is Evan Schwartz, co-founder of Century, specialize in video production and animation. Our unique differentiator is we like to have a story showing approach to content creation. So I'd say our specialty is really in that short form, high octane, like emotion evoking style of content creation, really in that 30-second sweet spot. Been working with a variety of companies in sports, entertainment, technology, consumer goods as well. Prior to starting the company with my co-founder, Mark Henry, out in California, we actually used to ski professionally as well. And we would always be generating content on Hill, filming each other, and curating it for sponsors to put on social media. And it naturally evolved into creating content for sponsors and non-endemic sponsors as well. Naturally led to the birth of Century, and now I'm actually located in the greater Boston area. Mark represents us out in the West Coast.
Fantastic. I think that it's very interesting that there are a lot of parallels between what we face as storytellers and what nonprofits are looking to do in terms of trying to convey a message. Yeah, I think that the thing that we always look at, similar to how we look at production, is how do you really understand up front if you're going to be building a campaign, or if you have a direction that you're going, what kinds of objectives are you setting for yourselves? And I thought we'd probably start off by talking about that, because before you even think about what you're going to produce, who you're going to get involved with it, I think it's very important that you set some objectives. John, we were talking about the understanding what you want to achieve as kind of the starting point for any of this. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So you're talking a little bit about strategy, and that's a really important place to start the conversation that sometimes gets overlooked. And a lot of the reasons that is because, we focus on the technology, and the technology of video has become so accessible, which is a good thing, provided it's used in the right way. I think we're kind of coming through the tail end of a learning curve from a lot of folks who are getting into video for the first time as a way of, telling their brand story, in that, seeing it as something that is the execution of a strategy. So rather than, starting a conversation by saying, we want to make a video or we want to make a series of videos without really understanding what's possible and what can be done. And I think that a lot of, mistakes that have been made in that area have been the fact that, without the need for a media buy, say putting something on a social media or YouTube, that is going to act as a billboard of sorts, where with all the traffic in the internet is going to come find your video. Whereas the conversation should start with how are you going to bring folks to see that? So for all the great reasons to use video as a visual medium and the fact that there is so many places you can put it, it works best when you understand how you're going to draw your audience to it. And a lot of that has to do with the strategy of not only what your message is, but who is your audience and how do they consume media. So, putting something up on YouTube to kind of languish in obscurity is not a very good use of your dollars for something like video, when you can be targeting it more in a social media platform or in a place where exactly the people you want to see it can access it.
Yeah, I think the audience is a really important topic because a lot of times nonprofits try to take a generic messaging approach where they think that how I'm going to appeal to a consumer in a fundraising activity is going to be similar to how I may approach a brand who I want to make part of my foundation. And so I think that, to your point, part of your strategy has to be understanding who that audience is going to be and recognizing you're going to have different audiences that you're going to be targeting along the way. Evan, your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. The great points, Mark and John. Really appreciate that as well. I think there's really a variety of ways that you can take it to. I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit organization, revenue is vital to an organization. And you have to understand really what makes your consumer tick and what's really important to them. I was speaking actually to the owner of a beverage company the other day. It's a very healthy beverage, what they offer to the market. And, when we were really trying to divide the demographics that they're looking to target, there's a lot of them. And I think the message there was in how we try to really break it out for them, what's the core message of your company, agnostic to the demographic that you're going after, because it sounds like you're looking to target a lot of those. So I think really finding that mission statement, that core statement that really represents your brand, and being able to spread that across maybe a variety of demographics so it really resonates and just has that unified brand approach and aesthetic when you're creating multiple pieces of content on a consistent basis.
You hit a really good point, Evan, which is around scale. That I think that it's one of the natural things that comes out of when you really understand your demographic. And what we find is really effective organizations not only understand the general demographic age group, for example, or gender, or or looking at specific communities, they understand the metrics around it. They understand that this is, we are going to try to reach X million people or X 10,000 people. And that has a big bearing on the scale in which you're going to be really looking at what kind of storytelling or campaign you're going to be doing.
Well, to that too, especially if you have one message that you may be telling to a few different audiences. The advantage with working with video is that it can be edited in different ways. You can take one piece and create multiple pieces of content out of it. And I think that's not news to most people, but knowing how to approach a story at the beginning when you're writing a script to what you're going to shoot with that in mind, knowing that we may come up with a 5-minute piece of content that could ultimately be created, could create 5 separate, executions of the same message. So that's one thing I think is a good way to approach using video, is how it can be, used for so many different purposes.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it really, I think it starts with as part of your strategy, looking at an omni-platform approach that recognizing who your demographics are for certain, but also understand where you're going to be meeting them. Are you going to be meeting them on TikTok? Are you going to be meeting them on Instagram? Are they going to be, Facebook oriented, or are you looking at more longer form content in terms of telling your message, where it's going to be more towards YouTube as kind of the way you go?
And speaking of, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Speaking of the Facebook, I mean, do you guys find that as it becomes more, people are used to seeing videos, they scroll and scroll by on Facebook. You find that that initial 2 seconds of your video has to be so much more of a grabber, so that give people a reason to stop, so that you're being more conscious about what can be seen even without the sound turned on. So we're doing a lot more, maybe in those initial few frames where there's something text driven or graphic driven that would make somebody just stop scrolling for a minute. And you're nodding. I kind of know the answer to that question.
Well, it comes down to platform
video.
is another, platform's an important part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that point as well. I think something a strategy that we like to take on social media as well. It's actually two pronged. So I think, even the size of the screen that you're scrolling through on, you have the ability to export your video in landscape. So it's wider than it is tall, or vertically. So it's taller than it is wide. And if you export a vertical video and you're able to portray it in the same way, that means that when somebody's scrolling through the screen, that they're actually going to have more time on your video, as opposed to a video that's completely landscape and it's just easier to flash by over, where your video can actually take up the entire screen. But John, to your point before as well, I think like in all videos and commercials that we like to create, that first few seconds is so vital. And though it's not always, a lot of the times, even though video is muted on social media, we love using audio within the first 2 seconds to really hook the viewer in with just an additional sense outside of sight, but really adding that audio portion to it.
And then how does this, let's talk a little bit about video as a media versus, say, banner ads or other forms of more static advertising. And kind of what are your experiences when you're talking to companies about, or to organizations about what media makes the most sense for them? What have you found?
Well, again, it's about who the audience is and how they consume the media. I think so much of what now is being consumed on a phone, which seems like most things anymore. Video has become such a natural, that's just such a natural use for video these days. So I'm obviously specific to the message and the product, but I think that banner ads are certainly a very specific thing to where somebody might be spending a fair amount of time in one place where that's going to catch their attention. I always think of video as something that's going to kind of stop somebody from what they're doing and divert their attention. Versus,
that's true, disruptive.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah. I think for us, when we make a video or commercial, however you want to phrase it, it's typically just not a one-off video, but more along the lines of a package. So if you want to create a commercial, it's not like you're going to just get one 30-second video from that, but a multitude of assets that exported in multiple dimensions, just depending on where your company posts. So it can adhere to all of those platforms. So you can literally take a commercial and make a 3-second GIF out of it. So if that company takes out ad spend on a specific platform, they'd be able to use that and upload it as their advertisement for that, and or turn it into a banner loop as well. I mean, we literally did that for ourselves for our own commercial reel, just making multiple versions of it. So adhere to a variety of different platforms, but it's just that one core concept of video spread out in a multitude of different ways.
That's a great point. We found in the last couple of years or so, and you just made me think of this, is how more often than not, everything that we approach, even if it starts as a conversation that feels very much like a commercial or an ad, that type of running time or that kind of usage, there's always an opportunity and a need to create some stuff to support it around social media, which means that, we rarely, go on a film set anymore, a video shoot, without there also being a professional still photographer, because, everything that we're creating, we do a lot of character-based stuff and narrative kind of scenic stuff, that having those assets as a support for the video and social media is always so crucial, that it's now kind of second nature to say we're also going to get some, not just candid shots, but also some staged things that we can then use for thumbnails or however we're drawing people to it.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little. Let's talk a little bit about the content itself. I mean, there's a debate I think that happens in advertising about whether the content that's being created, and I've seen this happen with video, whether the objective is to create a piece of evergreen content, something that is going to be able to last for a longer period of time, can be reused, can be repurposed, versus something that is capturing the mood of the moment, something that's topical today because of either a trend or a fad or something shocking that's happened in the world. What are kind of your thoughts around that in how organizations should look at the content itself that they're trying to work with?
Well, I think in general, just because, quite frankly, the budget's involved. I mean, it's an investment. And I think that, to be perfectly honest, whether a client might recognize that they want to get as much out of the process and the experience as they can, and therefore make it something that lasts longer than right now. A lot of times, as an agency, we're helping them along in that buying decision by offering those suggestions. Like, this is, it is a time and a money investment to put something on video, and the advantages to doing it is that it can be something that's created that can have some legs to it. Yeah, I mean, I think unless your message is so specific that it is, if it's seasonal, if it's a holiday thing, obviously that's meant to have a short life. But because the opportunities to have it live on are there, it's almost foolish to not at least explore that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. I think, I'm just thinking of two opportunities, or one opportunity that we've had, and then one of our favorite companies and favorite commercials. We were working with a startup in Boston, and their budget was limited. So for them, creating consistent content just really wasn't an option. They were really taking care of that consistency on their own with photos, supplementing that, and they have a consumer good, and that's what they sell. But they came to us because they knew that they wanted at least one core commercial and a variety of assets off of that. So for that, we really focus on big picture, thinking more broadly in terms of who is this company, what do they represent, and what is their product, all in one video. But then, to John's point, it all ties back to budget too. But then if you look at like a company like the New York Times, who has a very, very large budget, they have the option of really consistently creating these commercial campaigns around anything that's relevant at the current moment. And I know this year they've released their the truth campaigns. So they have the truth is hard, the truth is essential, the truth has a voice with gender equality, with that unified aesthetic, but really just going across the entire spectrum of different topics that are relevant within news and journalism today.
Yeah, and coming from the news space, I think that it's interesting that that theme is as important as topic. Topic can be something that can be covered. Like, we think of things in episodic format, so we're always looking at a series and how we're able to convey a message. And we may have a common theme that transitions over those 8 to 10 episodes, but we will look at specific topics that are relevant for a particular episode. And we see that happening particularly with when we're dealing with nonprofits, that it's important for them to really get as narrow as possible to leverage the limited money they have to invest. And so, they may be tied into the same theme, but they want to make sure that the topic that they're tied into is hyper relevant to what they're trying to do.
I like that. I like that. Use those words, theme and topic. I mean, that's really appropriate to our approach creatively. I think that we always start the conversation. I always think of the theme as kind of a higher level, entry point, and then the topics are subsets of that theme. And to our earlier point about creating something that has multiple uses, that's a great way to have that conversation. If you're budget conscious, and certainly if you're a nonprofit and you're looking to get the most out of this kind of messaging, that's a great way to look at it. What is the theme? But then what are the specific topics that we can divide this up to, so that with everything that we're making is hyper targeted to exactly the audience you need to speak to. And I like that language. It makes that very clear.
I think the other thing that we also look at and you were talking about earlier, Evan, about looking at demographics. I think that there's also a relevance for nonprofits that are operating on a geographically confined area, like they may be a localized nonprofit versus one who may be operating in a city or operating on a national scale or on an international scale. I think that that has a relevance as well. And we find that like when we're producing, we find that there are nonprofits that are much more localized that want to be part of a topic than looking at necessarily being part of a broader campaign, because they want to make sure that they're able to really hit that localized audience and have that appeal to the localized audience.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. I think in some senses it makes it more difficult. In some senses it makes it easier as well to target, because you know exactly who you're going after, and you can have a much more specific approach to it. But really understanding that audience as well, and creating that campaign around that concept too. Like if you're doing any work, let's say if you're in the Boston area, if you're supporting a nonprofit that does work at Gillette as well, really just trying to intertwine that I guess that massive reach that a Gillette Stadium would have relative to the nonprofit too, leveraging that and really creating a really crafty message to those to get more involved is a really strategic way that you can hit those big numbers, at least in the greater Boston area, while also remaining local too.
Absolutely.
So when you're dealing with, I think that one area that I talk to a number of nonprofits about is how to effectively market to brands, to bring brand support to what they're doing. Given the brands, especially now, we see the brands want to amplify their social message. Kind of what would you advise nonprofits to think about when they're approaching brands and looking at video content as a way to be essentially their calling card?
Yeah, I think just showcasing the engine that you've created, and what's possible with your nonprofit too. I think, um, you know, just by nature, the nonprofit is typically doing something very good for society, but also having to take a step out of that position and really see it from the brand perspective in terms of how can they get more awareness for their company, and how can you help them do that as well, and vice versa too. So I think again, it's a lot of it is on the human level when you're reaching out and pitching, coming up with don't be extremely generic when reaching out to a company. If you really want them to be on board with your nonprofit too, just really think about your differentiators, what separates you, what value you can add to them, and also how they can add value to your organization as well. I think going the extra distance there in terms of like putting together an overview and a plan in terms of what's possible to really separate yourself, because you have to understand that there are most likely a lot of other nonprofits going after the same organizations that you are, especially the larger that organization is and the deeper their pockets are.
Yeah, I think also, making sure that their values align with yours. There was I was part of a storytelling conversation yesterday where somebody had brought up where they had to, back out of what would have been a pretty lucrative partnership for them with the company because they, that particular media outlet was maybe damaging to their brand in terms of some of their particular values. And, this might be a bigger conversation than what we're here to talk about, but, the way anybody consumes things now or agrees to do business in any way with a company, whether it's a nonprofit or not, is understanding that where you stand in the world, right? Like where do you stand on social issues before I give you my attention or dollars? So I think that, anytime you're partnering on some level with another brand, you have to be sure that you know everything about how they feel about the things you feel about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good one too.
I think it's excellent. So do you see it? I mean, does that become part of the ideation process around the content that you're actually, talking about? Okay, what's this particular brand that you want to really you really want to target with getting them to be part of what your organization is about. I mean, does it get to that level, or is it more macro where you're coming to the nonprofit or the organization with an idea and you're just trying to get their buy-in to what you're doing?
Well, I like to think that in a good ideation session, it does get to that level. I mean, I think that that's always, I'm sure you agree that if you're working with a client, that when you can start, our job as content creators is to get to know our clients as much as we can, right? And if you can get to that point where, you're having those conversations about their values and how they align with others, then I think you're onto something. I think you're in the middle of a good creative conversation versus just, those that will say just like, here's the thing we want to sell and here's what it costs.
Mm-hmm.
Go do that for us.
Exactly.
We'll always do better when we understand, the personality of the brand. And I think that's where those, that kind of information will come out.
Yeah, exactly. They get extremely specific as well, to what that company has to offer too. How do you intertwine? Why is there a relationship? You can look at it from company to company and human to human as well. That relationship has to be there too from a company level. And also when you're reaching out to brands from a nonprofit perspective to be on board with your mission and your brand as well. I think where it can get a little bit more gray too, especially John, to your point, if there's a lot of financial opportunity out there, is really considering those non-endemic sponsors per se that might want to get on board as well, that might have a couple degrees of separation from what you're actually doing as a nonprofit, but also really positioning yourself and why the relationship would be cohesive or conducive, to both brands. Mm-hmm. And just really painting that out and being more specific, I think, is where you're able to really attract that company that you want on board.
What role go ahead, John?
Oh, sorry, just real quick, Dave, you nailed it when you said the why. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? So that's we talk about this all the time when we're addressing clients with a purpose and a strategy is, it's not it says, the whole Simon Sinek thing that we've all seen in the TED Talk where it's all about starting with the why, but it's never not true. And that's where all that information comes from. Instead of just saying, what is it we're trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? And that's where we unearth a lot of that really important stuff that can make the content great.
So, I mean, from a messaging perspective, is it important to separate the ask from the story, or is it, or is it really taking a more intelligent approach towards trying to weave in what the ask is without like kind of nailing people over the heads with it?
So
go ahead, John.
Yeah. So I will just say from a storytelling point of view, and this was sort of my topic of the thing I talked about yesterday is, I always default to this question about creative, which is, am I giving or am I taking? Right. So if you ever are in doubt as to what, I think you and I talked about this before, but am I asking, is my message about asking or getting something from you, whether it's your money or your time or, to volunteer or whatever, or is the reason for my message to give you something, in this case, some information about what my organization does and how that affects your community. So I think that's the question you're asking, how it sells, is it just a sales pitch, or is it you and I talked about how we use the term story sharing instead of storytelling. So yes. When the audience is part of the story that you're telling, then it's not really an ask, is it? It's kind of that's something that we're doing together. If we're doing it right, that's how it feels to the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. If it feels right and it's cohesive, that's really the best approach there. I think there's just a level of finesse that's involved in it too. I think, for anyone starting a nonprofit, starting a business in general, I think we all have that pressure to generate opportunities, generate business for your company. But I think as time progresses, you understand that finesse and understand where you're not a fit or where the customer perhaps is not a fit too. Mm-hmm. And I think that just all ties back to your ability to make it extremely natural and much more of a cohesive relationship. The relationship and the finesse are just extremely important there. So it's just very natural as both companies grow together.
It's a great point. And I think it's you tie you tie a couple of pieces together that we see that in many ways the thought processes that nonprofits go through has many parallels to what startups that are starting off go through in trying to look at budget, in trying to look at making sure their message is clear and that they're amplifying a really clear ask. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it does raise the question though for a nonprofit that's getting into video right now. When it comes to execution, who do you involve in your organization as part of this? I mean, is it that you simply trust an agency that you're going to, or a partner who's going to do it for you? Who do you see a nonprofit having to involve in this kind of the ideation through the production process?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
While I think it through.
I think what we see is the first thing is rule of thumb is yes, you can set a budget for what you're trying to do, but after you've set the budget, keep the financial people separated from the creation process. I think it's an important divide that has to happen, and this is the same advice I give to startups, that you have specific objectives, you have specific audience, and you can certainly scale based on the size of audience you're trying to target with it. But I think it's important that you're not having the financials be this kind of this gray cloud that's hanging over the production process. Because I think it leads to decision processes and confusion that can actually waste money rather than actually drive better economies.
That's a good point. I would say, as far as budgets are concerned, I always say, like, you can start the conversation by saying, like, tell us how much money you have and we can create to that, or tell us what you want to create and then we can tell you what it costs. That's kind of the only two. You can't tell us what you want and then also tell us what your budget is. But if you're realistic, the thing about video is it is scalable. It can be done at a lot of different levels, and as long as the expectations are realistic. So I think to your point, that's, that if everyone's budget conscious, and that's fine to say, we have X amount of dollars we want to spend on this. And I think that is when the person, the stakeholder with the financial information steps aside, as you say, and then let those of us who know how to creatively work within that do that. Because if you start trying to make creative decisions with budget in mind, that's where things end up not turning out the way you want them to turn out.
Yeah, you raise a really great point. I was just like, it's the difference between an RFP and a proposal. It's like on the one side, it's like, okay, we'll respond to it, and this is how much it's going to cost you. I think that there's a common theme that you guys have both talked about, which is the need for the conversation. You need to have a discussion about what your intent is with the content. And I think more importantly, from a budgeting perspective, recognize the benefit of being able to reuse content. You've got a lot more, a static ad. It's about getting as many impressions of that ad out there as possible. It's not so much about reusing the content. Whereas video, I think it's by its very design, it's intended to be able to be used on multiple platforms, be reused in multiple contexts. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it.
Yeah, I think that relationship too, as you mentioned before, just even between tying back to the financial side of it and the creative side of it, really just anchoring down that number and then moving forward from there. Because I think it's the worst when you are moving forward on a project and either party, whether being finance or creative, have to go back to one another and either pull or request additional funds. Mm-hmm. I mean, at its core, the definition of to create is to develop something from nothing. Right. And if you look at these, the Truth Campaign from the New York Times, I mean, they already have the rights to these existing photos that they've intertwined into a commercial. So there's no actual video, yet right. They have one of the most compelling 30-second commercials repeated over numerous times. And you have to see it as that's just truly a beautiful concept and a creative idea right there, all in the editing and the storytelling and showing. Mm-hmm. So I think that it really ties back to just understanding the budget, knowing what you're working with, and then being able to create and execute something fantastic after that, despite how low or how high it is.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were saying about the idea too. When the story's right, when it's the message is on point, um, there's a lot of options on how to execute it. And if you don't necessarily have to have an A-list actor and helicopter shots and all that and CGI. You can do a lot with a little if the message is clear, and that's, I think from a creative standpoint, that's really, our job in working with clients is how to help them do that. So if all you have is the ability to have text on screen or use some existing assets, with the proper understanding of what the story is and who you're telling the story to, you can work within those parameters.
Just a quick reminder to everyone out there, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat, and we will get to them. We'll finish up with a Q&A at the end. So hopefully you're enjoying this dialogue. John, you brought a really interesting point. You're actually segueing into my next topic, which is about talent and influencers in particular. I want to get your thoughts. I mean, Evan, you come from a sports background. John, you come from a comedy background. I'm curious, I think we all use influencers in some ways or fashions in the content that we produce. What's your take on the use of influencers, whether they be micro, macro, A-list, kind of where your thinking is there?
I'd say in general, just because of the nature of the work that we do, that we're more likely to use professional talent versus amateur talent. So we don't do a lot of, just from where we're coming from, we do a lot of narrative and scenic stuff. So we don't do a lot of, say, talking head style stuff or, having the client appear in video, just because of usually we're brought in to do something that's a little bit more narrative in nature. So I'm a fan, of using of professional talent. But there is obviously, certainly in the nonprofit world, there is a need for, the stakeholders to actually be telling the story. So that is from my point of view, I think that's really understanding how to direct that sort of talent to who maybe isn't comfortable in front of a camera, but if, coached and edited properly, can be the most effective storytellers for what they're trying to do. I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I fully agree as well. I think having the right set amount of influencers is extremely important. But John, to your point earlier as well, just like when you're seeking out a company to partner with, there definitely has to be alignment on that influencer relative to your brand. Even if there's an influencer out there with a tremendous following, they just might not be the right fit for your brand. And understanding that, and not just getting caught up in the pure numbers, but also how they really resonate and how their message really resonates with your message too, is really important when you're going out and looking for that talent as well. I'd rather connect an influencer with a brand that has a little bit less of a following, but that really clicks, rather than someone with a much higher number that has nothing to do with what the company actually represents.
Or who the audience is. I mean, we're talking about sports too. I mean, yeah, you make a great point that, if you're delivering a message to athletes or folks involved in sports, there's nobody better to tell that story than an athlete who's been through it. I mean, that's hard to fake if you've never been through it. So in those cases where you're actually representing the audience, I think you can't do much better than to have somebody who's been there.
Do you generally rely on the organization that you're working with to recommend who those people are going to be, or are you using data? How are you getting to that point where you're bringing in that influencer, or that celebrity, or that professional into what you're doing?
From our standpoint, we've always worked with the company. Typically will provide the said influencers. We're just fully focused on the creative execution behind it, and how we can blend that influencer and the company's message together to create something compelling. But with that said, I think as time has progressed as well and our company has evolved, we've definitely created a lot of great relationships. So if there's ever an opportunity to introduce an influencer from a past campaign into a new company that we're working with, present date, we're always open to making that introduction too. But I think where we really fit into the equation is not on the recruitment of the recruiters, or excuse me, for the influencers, but just really conceptualizing an idea and really putting together the idea of what the campaign will look like and how to create that.
Yeah, I would say same. I think anytime that conversation comes up, it's generally comes from the point of view of the client or somebody they would already have in mind.
Are you finding that that metrics weigh in on this as well in terms of what the objectives are? You know, if they want to reach a certain size of audience, they want to have a certain level of engagement. Does that weigh into the type of talent or approach that you're going to take on a production?
Yeah, I think.
Always. Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I think metrics are extremely important. I would say that it's almost completely 180 campaigns that we've developed for customers as well. In the past, I keep going back to this the beverage use case that we had in the past, but at first we thought that it was just fully a social media strategy that the organization had. So we're thinking about different concepts and the plan that we had, which really affected the actual creative and what we were actually going to develop over the specific timeline. But we realized what that wasn't necessarily what was most important directly attributed to revenue, but actually it was email campaigns and being extremely specific and targeted in that sense. That's they found the biggest correlation with revenue. So it completely flipped how we were going to actually execute the creative, because everything that we were going to create for these email campaigns easily transferable to the different social media platforms that they have today as well. Mm-hmm. And just by having that as the spear to the campaign, the email concept, that really just drove the whole creative behind it as well, and really had a ripple effect into their social media strategy and what content they were going to produce and utilize from Century.
That's an excellent example of how all of these pieces that we've been talking about come together. You know, the decision on platform, the decision on the people that you want conveying the message, the importance of understanding the audience, and having really clear objectives of how much of that audience you want to be able to reach. You know, I think that's kind of a universal thing with campaigns, but I think it's even more important for video. If you look at video, not as a single video that you're putting out there, but rather an element of more of a campaign, where you've got multiple platforms, you've got cut downs, you've got this variety out there. I think that's what we've found is it has always been interesting from a metrics perspective, is that, going in there, assuming that you're going to have far more reach and far more interaction with smaller, shorter forms than you may have with that central video that you put out there. I think it's an important consideration that don't put all your money into a single video. Look for organizations that are looking at this as a function of campaign. I think that's hugely relevant.
Very, very good point. I think too, as far as metrics, it used to be all about the views, right? How many views did it get? So people start to realize that doesn't tell the whole story. You don't know who's watching. So, we don't have any conversations about video anymore that don't, almost start with what's the call to action? What do you want people to do at the end of this video? So it's about, generating, social media likes are good. Gathering information. We're, more and more starting to have conversations around interactivity as well, because that level of engagement, which is now so much more accessible and so much more possible to do stuff, that it's not enough for everybody to know that somebody watched your video. They want to know that you interacted with it and that they can, learn something from the viewer. Yep. What's that?
You have a conversion.
Yeah. So it's, metrics just get more sophisticated all the time. And it's definitely a changing part of our business, where we're trying to make sure that these aren't passive pieces anymore. There's things that people have to react to and interact with, and if done well, we'll get a behavior from them.
Yeah, I
I
think
couldn't.
that's a great point too, John, that you mentioned there, where it's very easy in the creative space to get so caught up in the aesthetic that you can almost miss the key point or the message. And I think we've all been there where you're watching television, you see the most beautiful commercial ever, and you forget the company that actually put it on and paid
Oh,
for it.
all the time.
Yep.
Exactly. So yeah, really hammering down that message, and ensuring that the you have a just knowing that you have a finite amount of time for someone to actually see it. And again, it's what's underneath the metrics too. It can get a lot of views, but actually having that interaction with the piece and for the viewer to take next steps. And
Mhm.
I think that all ties back to the strategy of the campaign and how you lay out the creative too,
Mhm.
to really piecemeal it and bait them in, and really just attract them to what you're doing and having them resonate.
Really
You
excellent
mentioned
point.
commercials. I'm sorry. I love to talk about, like, the great example of that is the Geico commercials, right? Which are
Yes.
probably the most fun projects to write on as a creative, because they're not about anything. They don't make any points at all. There's no differentiators, and they have nothing to do with insurance. It's just like, here's 18 different funny concepts just so that we can put our name at the end of them. But they've given up even trying to, like, show you any benefits of the product.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's a lizard. It's
Yeah.
a half motorcycle, half guy. I don't know what that's got to do with anything, but it's
Yeah.
It's about the brand, not the product.
right.
So yeah,
Exactly. So
it's
they've given themselves permission not to have to really have any message involved. It's just like, fill that space with something entertaining.
Yeah,
yeah.
But that
differentiating.
doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, it's really differentiating between a features and functionality type of piece versus something analogous and big picture that gets somebody
Yeah.
to laugh.
Yep.
Right.
And I think Evan, it comes down for us. It comes down again to the audience and how that's going to resonate. I think that what's been interesting for us to watch from a metrics perspective is a lot of what has happened with agencies in the past is they've looked at metrics as a validation tool. Basically, this is how we validate whether or not our campaign worked, is on the back end of this. What we're finding now is demographics. Yes, that plays an important role in trying to narrow the type of content you're going to produce. It's important in trying to understand better what the budget is going to be or what the right budget should be. But we're actually finding that psychographics are playing an even more important role in the production planning process for us, because understanding how people are going to respond to something like humor, or how they're going to respond to a specific person who's your spokesperson, because of the words that they use when they're connecting to their audiences. A lot of times there's a lot more predictions that can be made about how content's going to work because of that. So I think it's interesting to watch that. We've kind of lived in this world where it's a highly creative process, and now what we're seeing is science catching up with that, and
Yeah.
really trying to create a jigsaw puzzle effect rather than leaving it being a kind of an open canvas for you to paint on. And so it's an interesting thing to watch with this.
Yeah.
So I think that we're kind of winding down now to the end of this really great conversation, and I wanted to ask you guys, kind of as a final thought, what are your takeaways to a nonprofit that right now is looking at video and as an option for themselves? What are the main things that you would say, the three or four things that they should think about when they're approaching a new project? Who they should get involved with? What types of things they should be doing? What are the things that your top pieces of advice for them?
Well, I mean, just to wrap up what we've been touching on, I think it's, understand, maybe in this order: understand your audience, understand what it is you're trying to tell them. Bring in a company that will have that conversation with you. There are a lot of great, we're talking about video. There are a lot of great production companies out there who are very good technically at what they do. I think because of the nature of the messaging around nonprofit, for sure, it's so specific, and it's generally very emotional, and requires a connection that means investing in some really good storytelling. So I think if nothing else, invest the resources and the time in building that strategy and understanding how best to tell that story, so that when it comes time to hire that crew, you've made all the right decisions. You've set yourself up for success that way. You don't have to be making Super Bowl ads. You need to work on targeting things with the right people, and delivering a very specific message to those folks. And it doesn't necessarily have to include such a broad audience. If you know who you're talking to, then yes, start there with the right story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think to your point, John, just like really understanding the core message and the mission statement too of your nonprofit, how you help people, how you attract those as well, how you generate revenue too. The more of that you can generate, the more you can provide back for the good cause that you have in place today too. I think those are really important, and then really just playing to your strengths in that sense. If you're able to, as a nonprofit, if you're making $0 on social media and $1 million on email campaigns, and you're able to have a great cause like that, you have to understand that and really just run with it, rather than playing toward a weakness. So just really understanding where your strengths are, and again, those sponsors, influencers that really resonate with your brand too, and where you're able to really produce that relationship and have everything gel really cohesively.
Really great points. I think, and we really didn't touch on, I think that this point you raised around knowing what works.
Yeah.
If you're finding success with a particular type of campaign or a particular type of content that is connecting, make sure that you look at that, and make sure that your partners are looking at that, so that if you're going to be making further investments, be sure that you're able to exploit that, because obviously that's money well spent in how you're looking at things. But I think I think that we look at this very similar to what you guys have brought up, which is the importance of knowing who you are, the importance of knowing who you want, who your message is connecting with. Who is it that are the people who are going to benefit from what you're doing, and who are the people that are going to help you to be able to help those people. I think that those are all important dialogues that you have to have as a company before you get anyone involved. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money chasing, things unwisely.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is starting simple. When it comes to content, when we talk to nonprofits, particularly small nonprofits, we always say, start simple and think evergreen. That if your first endeavor into video, don't do a Super Bowl commercial. Right. It's the economics on it have enough Harvard Business School studies that have been done that you can point to and tell you that it's going to be a colossal waste of time. You're much better come up with something that's simple, that resonates, that has an evergreen element to it, so that it's something that you can come back to a year from now, and people will say, "Oh yeah, I remember them." That's when you know that you've left an impression, and I think that's vitally important. And make sure there are a million production companies out there. There are, and all have different strengths. They have different areas that they work with, but make sure that before you even, look at the numbers on this, have a dialogue with them and make sure that they understand what you're about, because there are an awful lot of agencies that certainly that I've worked with that have the best of intentions, but they want to put you in a box because that's how the economics work for them. And that's fine and good. But if you're, from a nonprofit perspective, have that dialogue to make sure that you're comfortable with how they're going to capture your messaging. Make sure that they're conveying, that they're in line with what you want to do, what you see as your end game. And so that's what we generally will recommend to nonprofits when we're working with them. And then, of course, have a discussion up front about how you're going to measure success, because you want to be able to look back and say, yeah, this was money well spent, especially if you're looking at something like video.
Yeah, and to bring it back to the beginning, show don't tell. Remember, use that visual medium, and especially if you're talking about sports. I mean, that's something you've got access to that tells a story better than any talking head can. So, while sometimes the the instinct is to just to tell the story as it needs to get that information out there. Don't forget that you're using a visual medium, and take advantage of every opportunity you have to show what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, it looks like we've come to the end of this amazing session, and I can't thank you guys enough for your insight. And I want to thank everyone in the audience who attended today. Really appreciated you listening in on what we're talking about with nonprofits, and like as John mentioned, show don't tell, and that's where it all starts. So thank you all, and take care.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, John.
Thanks, guys.